you to the future. The African locust, being studied to enhance pedestrian safety. New research set to overturn standard practice in the emergency room. And meeting the challenges of climate change with new technology. NASA scientists are turning their attention back to the Moon. A new lunar orbiter is currently remapping its surface. Most of our knowledge about the Moon's topography was gathered during the 1960s in preparation for the series of Apollo moon landing missions. As Apollo 11 sat on its launch pad waiting for blastoff, the whole world watched. It happened at the height of the Cold War, and American prestige was on the line. But after the first successful landing, the Apollo program was scaled back, and only 12 men would visit the Moon. Apollo 17, the last manned mission to the Moon, returned to Earth in late 1972. With it, political will to continue Moon exploration stopped, and funding was cut off. Now, an abandoned fast food restaurant has become headquarters for a program to recover hundreds of reels of lunar data that has been neglected for almost 40 years. Hundreds of thousands of high-resolution images of the Moon were stored on 2-inch videotape. 1,500 reels were on the verge of being dumped. Dennis Wingo of the Lunar Orbiter Image Recovery Project likes his unusual working conditions.
May have ended up in some lab behind the NASA fence, but instead we're in this actually pretty cool place.
It was realized that the images on these tapes could be of great use for the proposed new series of moon landings. Comparisons between the 40-year-old pictures and images being gathered today would reveal how the Moon's surface is changing.
These would have ended up in a dumpster.
To retrieve the pictures, the image recovery team had to refurbish 2 FR900 tape drives, obsolete 2-inch videotape machines. Machines like this formed the backbone of the television industry in the 1960s and 70s, but they were replaced by smaller, less complex machines during the 1980s. The signals from the analog machines are being converted into digital files, combining the recovered pictures with information about the time they were made and the particular location on the Moon's surface they represent.
See, that's why what we're doing with Apple, what we want to do is to get this to where we can do it in real time on a computer as we're digitizing.
The techniques being used here have been dubbed techno-archaeology, and finding the appropriate tape container is one of the most difficult tasks faced by the team.
See, this is there's 4 heads on this rotating drum, and that's what creates the video signal, and this pretty much is the same type of heads and everything for the commercial units.
The Lunar Image Recovery team is using digital processing methods to remove some of the banding artifacts that originated from imperfections in the spacecraft image scanning hardware. Some of the images are oblique views that reveal more recent impacts with greater brightness than older craters. Oblique images are proving useful in doing crater aging studies. The recovered images show remarkably fine detail, with some even featuring early lunar landing craft.
No one has done any better. The Europeans haven't, the Chinese haven't, the Japanese haven't. And even NASA after that never had any better, higher resolution.
As well as pictures of the Moon, the cameras on the lunar reconnaissance orbiters were sometimes pointed towards Earth, revealing the earliest images made of our planet. These images were recorded on film and developed on the spacecraft before being automatically scanned and transmitted back to Earth.
Help bring the history back from oblivion, and now it is going to become a value even today, what we did 40 years ago.
The peculiar research facility is affectionately called McMoons. And in Europe, engineering company GMV is adapting technologies developed for space for use on the ground. In the Spanish city of Valladolid, the buses are tracked by a GPS management system. The large display panels relay accurate information, and a coordination centre allows staff to track the city's fleet and make instant timetable changes. Originally, GMV was a modest Spanish company. Consisting of a small number of engineers, it took part in the European Space Agency's first space missions and quickly gained an excellent reputation in the European space sector. The European Space Agency works closely with European institutions and industry to ensure that developments in space are ultimately used to improve people's lives. ESA says that because materials used in space have to be light, extremely resistant, and 100% reliable, they are the best around. It's ironic that some of the space applications were originally developed by studying organic systems. The field of robotics has freely borrowed from skeletal and muscular systems of the human body. Similar systems have been fundamental in building the International Space Station. Scientific findings about the African locust are being used to improve road safety for pedestrians. Dr. Claire Rind at England's Newcastle University has been studying the locusts.
I think it was my own experience of driving and of being a pedestrian and realising that the ability that I've found in the locust would be very valuable in that context. The locust has a very quick reaction, and the circuits are very reliable, and they do their computation against such a lot of clutter, and that's exactly what it's like driving in town.
The Volvo car company has picked up on her research and have the long-term aim of transporting the locust's unique capabilities onto a computer chip and then installing this into a car's safety system.
Imagine that you are a grasshopper in a swarm of grasshoppers flying over the fields trying to find food. There is almost chaos in the swarm, but there are no traffic rules. Still, the individual grasshoppers are able to avoid collisions. They are really masters of collision avoidance, and we are trying to find out how they can do this. They have a very small brain that consumes almost no power, but they are still able to avoid collisions, and we want to understand why.
Every year, millions of road users are injured by cars that are unable to stop in time. Radar systems already exist, systems that can warn the driver if a person or animal suddenly appears in front of the car. But tomorrow's systems must react even faster, which will require new knowledge and technology. If Volvo succeeds in decoding the insect's secret, it would be a revolution in road traffic safety.
If we understand the mechanisms, we can choose to integrate them into the car and, so to say, take the best parts of nature of 4.5 billion years of evolution and use this for the collision-free traffic system.
Dr. Rind has discovered that the secret lies in the locust's eye, that via nerve cells enables the direct processing of visual information. In less than a millisecond, the locust's eye sends signals to its wings and legs that enable it to avoid collision.
It's an amazing thing, sort of the culmination of a lot of work is designing this system, and to be able to put the circuitry of a locust brain into a camera for a car, it's an amazing thing, and not many biologists have had that experience of transferring their knowledge into a useful application.
And at Volvo, they have great hopes for this new technology.
Well, I think that this technology, parts of this technology may enter our cars in 10 or 15 years. It has to prove itself that it's an efficient technology, of course.
For years, it has been recognised procedure around the world to lower blood sugar levels of patients in intensive care units to reduce the risk of hypoglycemia. It's a common condition among acutely ill patients, and it's associated with complications including organ failure and death. But now there are concerns about how safe this practice really is.
In recent times, there was some suggestion that aggressively lowering blood sugars down to a level of 4.5 to 6 may in fact improve survival. But there was some uncertainty about these early results. So the point of our study was to do a large-scale landmark study to address this important question and to determine whether or not this level of blood sugar lowering was in fact safe and effective.
A group of researchers from Australia, New Zealand and Canada decided to determine the target range for blood glucose levels in critically ill patients, and their findings have contradicted the accepted guidelines. 42 hospitals recruited more than 6,000 critically ill. Half of them had their blood sugar lowered, while the rest had their levels kept the same. Studies showed that reducing blood glucose is actually harmful to patients.
We found that patients who received the intensive blood glucose lowering strategies had a higher death rate than patients who had conventional or normal blood glucose management.
In fact, the death rate was 10% greater among those in the study who had their sugar levels lowered.
It's a huge study. It answers a very, very important clinical question. Until this point in time, we've always known that a low blood sugar was bad for you, a high blood sugar was bad for you, but in the critically ill, we didn't know exactly where the normal blood sugar was. Some evidence from overseas suggested intensive insulin therapy may have improved the survival of patients, but this study it is a big study. It's been a fantastic effort from the nurses and the doctors, the researchers, and it is answering the question for us that intensive blood sugar lowering is not good for you.
Each year in Australia, over 125,000 people are admitted to intensive care units with around a 6% mortality rate. The researchers hope their findings will change how patients are managed in intensive care units around the world. This is the Sau Reservoir in northern Spain now. But last year, the picture was very different. The worst drought in generations left Sau at only 20% of its capacity, and Barcelona was worried. The waters covered the small village of Sant Roma de Sau, but during the drought, the village reappeared. Recent rain has replenished the reservoir, and now it is 90% full. But such large fluctuations in levels have not been recorded at the dam before. At its lowest ebb, Sant Roma de Sau was completely back above water for the first time since the dam was built. Now just the tip of the tower is visible. At the Lakeside Leisure Centre, boats are being prepared for a busy summer season. Enrique Costa is a maintenance worker at the centre, and he thinks that the future could hold more problems.
I feel calm when I see the reservoir so full of water. I can see life in it. It creates life. About the drought, I'm not an expert to assert whether it was due to climate change or not. But I can say that this will be a good year for us, with lots of water. But we must be careful.
Now that Catalan reservoirs are at close to maximum capacity, the fountains of Barcelona are working again. The distribution and infrastructure of water resources in the autonomous region of Catalonia are controlled by the Catalan Water Agency. The control centre monitors the functioning and capacity of all reservoirs in Catalonia. From this desk at the facility, floodgates at any of the reservoirs in the region can be controlled and water quality can be monitored. Jose Miguel de Guez is the Chief Supervisor of the Control Centre.
It is true that there are periods of drought and heavy rain in the Mediterranean. But we must also consider that climate change may be playing a role in these severe droughts we suffer from these days. Also, the increased population results in more demand for water. So here we face a cycle of rain and drought, typical of the Mediterranean climate affected by climate change, added to an ever-increasing demand for water.
Last year, a tanker carrying tap water from the southern region of Andalusia arrived at the port of Barcelona. It was an experiment to see whether it was practical to deliver water this way during a drought. The event proved to be a public relations disaster for the popular tourist destination. Quim Perez is an activist from the Spanish environmental organisation Ecologists in Action.
I'm not a guru or a scientist, but the scientific community says that the causes of last year's drought are not related to climate change. But scientists predict that from the second half of this century, there will be tangible effects from climate change. Rainfall will be more concentrated in short periods, and they will be much more torrential. As well, temperature will increase, and for each extra degree, rainfall will decrease.
Now both the national and regional governments are putting into place new infrastructure designed to overcome drought. One such project is Barcelona's new desalination plant. The plant will take water from the Mediterranean and, through a process known as reverse osmosis, will turn it into drinking water. The plant will produce 200 million litres of water per day, a fifth of Barcelona's needs. Though this is the newest plant of this type, it will still need a lot of electricity to function, and it will discharge high concentrations of salt back to the sea. Thomas Cazura is the construction supervisor for the new plant.
It is evident that rainfall is irregular in this region, and the new plant will make us less reliant on uncertain weather patterns. This plant will be able to produce water regardless of rainfall. It's a new source that will make water for the metropolitan area.
During last year's crisis, Barcelona set an example for the rest of the country, saving some 4,000 litres of water per person. Dolores Subrios is a housewife from the central neighbourhood of Example. She now regularly uses a number of water-saving techniques. Dolores now saves the water she uses to rinse vegetables, or water from the air conditioner is used to water plants or clean the floor. She says she will continue to conserve water regardless of weather conditions. Around the world, attitudes to water are changing along with rainfall patterns. London's Houses of Parliament, recently the famous clock at the eastern end of the complex, celebrated its 150th birthday. Known as Big Ben, after its giant main bell, the famous clock started ticking in 1859, and the bell was struck for the first time 6 weeks later. The original Palace of Westminster burnt to the ground in 1934, and Big Ben was built as part of the new Gothic complex. At the time, the Astronomer Royal specified that the clock should run with an accuracy of plus or minus 1 second every day, an unprecedented standard of precision that was thought impossible. Its famous chimes, supposedly based on the 4 notes in Handel's Messiah, ring out every quarter hour from the intricately ornamented belfry. The giant Big Ben itself strikes out the hour. The 5-ton clock mechanism is wound 3 times a day. In the age of atomic clocks, its near-perfect time is regulated by heavy old pennies laid on or removed from the pendulum. Ian Westworth is the mechanic responsible for Big Ben.
And they wanted the clock tower and the clock to be the most impressive, a big icon in the centre of London. So this is why the palace is built with the clock tower at one end of it. It had the biggest dials of the day, 24 feet across. They're going to have the biggest bell of the day at 13.5 tons, the biggest clock, and it had to be the most accurate clock. So what they've done, they actually made a clock to plus or minus 1 second a day. Back in 1850s, 1860s, a good clock was 2 or 3 minutes a day, and lots of people said it just couldn't be done.
Big Ben's clock is purely mechanical. It is driven by weights. The mechanism was built by clockmaker Edward John Dent, who completed it in 1854, 5 years before the clock tower was finished. Dennison, the clock's designer, had time to experiment with different technologies and ended up replacing the specified deadbeat escapement with a new system of his own design.
What makes it so accurate is that we have, for the day, a revolutionary escapement. It's called the double 3-legged gravity escapement. It's a very grand title. And it's fantastic. It isolates the pendulum from all external forces, apart from an impulse just to keep it going. And because you've made it so accurate, it keeps the clock so accurate. But we do have to make adjustments to it. We have to, occasionally it does wander out of time, and we're only allowed plus or minus 1 second. So what we do to keep it in time, we add, or take off, old pre-1972 pennies. We put 1 penny on and it speeds the clock up by 2/5 of a second in 24 hours.
The pendulum is set inside a windproof enclosure beneath the clock room. It is 3.9 metres long, weighs 300 kilograms and beats every 2 seconds. The only modern technology in the system is an electric motor used to wind it. Big Ben receives lots of donations from people with old pennies who want to see them go to a good home.
It's wonderful. We get people send them to us, please have my penny, I've had it since 1972. We actually had a group of people came and visited who gave us one of the last mintings that had never been in circulation, a little envelope present, given it to us. Here you go. Little old lady sent us a whole envelope with them all sellotaped to a letter. Lovely.
The big clock's only major malfunction happened in 1976, when the regulator in the chiming mechanism broke after more than 100 years of service. This caused the 4-ton weights to crash into the chiming mechanism, resulting in damage that shut it down for 26 days over a 9-month period. At various other times, extreme weather conditions have caused the clock to stop, and on other occasions it has been stopped to repair parts that had worn so much the clock's reliability was threatened. During the First World War, the chimes were deactivated for fear that the noise would attract Zeppelin bombers.
Touch wood, it stops very seldom. Occasionally, we have had a flock of starlings long before I was here, actually landed on the hands, and just the increase in weight stopped the clock, because obviously it can't compensate for everything. It has iced up before, but usually it's something very simple. There used to be a man in the palace who used to change all the light bulbs, and we used to have a light bulb right above the middle of the clock, and one day he stretched across to change the light bulb, fell in, stopped the clock and made it strike the wrong time. It was state opening of Parliament, so they had to get somebody up here very quickly before the Queen came in to actually make sure it struck the right time while she was here.
Despite being hit by bombs during the Second World War, the clock is still working within the exact design parameters laid down in 1846. These days, the technical achievements of its construction during the Victorian era have been overshadowed, but Big Ben still serves as one of London's iconic landmarks.